In the Eastern rites of the Orthodox Church, during the prosthesis, that is, during the proscomedia, the prayers during the preparation of the bread and wine before liturgy, the priest, when taking out the seventh particle from the leavened bread that will be consecrated during liturgy, prays in honor and memory of the holy, glorious, and wonder-working unmercenary physicians, Cosmos and Damian, Cyrus and John, Ptolemaeon and Hermolaus, and of all the unmercenary healers. The six named who practiced medicine or assisted in the practice of medicine without charging for the care they gave were also martyrs under the Roman Empire. They were killed not just for being Christians. They were killed for being Christians who, in the face of a pagan empire, made it clear to their patients that the only real cure for sickness and death is Christ. They understood that the surrounding pagan culture could seduce Christians, but it could not violate their conscience. Despite a hostile, dominant culture and its requirements, they were totally unashamed and unembarrassed about being fully committed, proselytizing Christians. They were martyred for their determination to practice health care as Christians should practice medicine, namely proclaiming in their practice the good news of the kingdom. We are in a culture with increasingly strong family resemblances to the cultural context of the first 3 centuries of Christianity, though our culture is distinguished in being neo-pagan at best and post-metaphysical, that is, after God, at worst. The hostility of the contemporary secular culture towards Christianity is at the root of the growing challenges and obstacles to living as traditional Christians and practicing medicine as traditional Christians should. We find ourselves in a massive collision between two cultures, which collision is reflected in the culture wars between the now dominant secular culture and the Christianity that survives in the remnants of Christendom. My goal in this presentation is to provide a geography of these conflicts of culture in order better to understand our contemporary cultural situation and the place of Christian bioethics in our post-Christian world. My particular focus is on why the obligation to God of individual Christians and Christian institutions to refuse to provide or even refer for forms of medical treatment and health care that Christians know to be immoral is such a secular moral outrage. The goal is to appreciate better why the invocation of personal and institutional religious obligation as grounds for not providing interventions such as abortion, in vitro fertilization with embryo transfer for those who are other than men and women joined in marriage, physician-assisted suicide and euthanasia constitutes such a profound moral affront to the partisans of the contemporary dominant secular culture. Traditional Christians must recognize the magnitude and sources of the political incorrectness of the Christian moral and bioethical obligations that require Christians, including Christian healthcare professionals, to act in violation of the secular ethic. In this essay, I will avoid speaking of the rights of conscience or of conscientious objection. Instead, I will identify obligations to God. The deepest evil is not the seduction of individual moral consciences, which is surely evil, but the violation of the will of God. I recognize that in etymology, conscience does indeed derive from the Latin conscio, to know well, or to be conscious of what is wrong. I also recognize that those who in good faith who act wrongly nevertheless commit a sin in ignorance. Misformed conscience, which leads one to do an evil act, even though one thinks one's acting rightly, is still an involuntary sin, a sin of ignorance. In particular, I wish to avoid an appeal to individual rights and instead to talk of individual obligations to God. Last but not least, I shall not refer to Orthodox obligations being located in, or my speaking from, the Orthodox tradition. Nor will I employ truth-deflating phrases such as, the Orthodox Christian tradition teaches. In lieu of such theology-deflating, postmodern, post-metaphysical discourse, I will simply speak of what Orthodox Christianity knows. Consider how bizarre, truth-deflating, and out of place it would be if I, as a physician, said, in my tradition, you have type 2 diabetes. It would be bizarre. First, I will explore the great gulf separating traditional Christianity from the contemporary dominant secular culture, so as to show why the secular culture is committed to compelling Christian physicians, healthcare professionals, and healthcare institutions to provide healthcare services that Christians know, or should know, to be immoral. Then I show why moral philosophical reflections cannot offer a common ground that can bridge the gulf between these cultures in conflict. Christianity, as I will then mention, did not have to wait for the bioethics of the late 20th century to have substance for its bioethics, which bioethics was, is, and will remain at odds with the non-traditional Christian, pagan, and secular moral and bioethical visions that surround us. Finally, I will bring these reflections together in a summary of why the secular culture possesses such a strong animus against the refusal of traditional Christians to make available all legally established healthcare services. In this context, it is not correct to suggest that the secular culture seeks to violate the conscience of Christian healthcare professionals. Instead, as in the first 300 years of Christianity, Christians are faced with the need to decide whether they will be confessors of the faith in the face of a hostile secular culture, or whether they will allow themselves to be seduced by that culture. That's the introduction. Now we're made to the second section, so we can wake up for a few minutes. The secular culture's opposition to Christian physicians, healthcare professionals, and healthcare institutions refusing to provide the full, legally established range of medical services can only be adequately appreciated against the background of the foundational conflict between the bioethical commitments of traditional Christians versus the moral and bioethical demands of the now dominant secular culture. Christians are now the odd man out.